will be because the microphone's on mute. Right, okay, thank you, Graham, for that. Hopefully you can hear me now. I managed to press the mute button on the microphone button. That's now okay, hopefully. So just if you can, somebody just say you can hear me, then I shall carry on. As I was saying, I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is Elevenses, and as it's the late December show, I'm doing a retrospective of news stories from the first 6 months of the year. I've got a couple of news stories as well to start off with. I trust everybody had a really pleasant Christmas. I was on the way back from a rather damp and soggy Devon yesterday morning, which is why today's show is a day late. Anyway, to get on with it, a couple of news stories. First one here: US servicewoman Michaela Hayes appeared before Norwich Crown Court last Wednesday. She's been charged with causing the death by careless driving of a 33-year-old motorcyclist. Matthew Day was riding on the A10 near Downham Market in Norfolk in August this year, when his Yamaha was in collision with a red Honda Accord being driven by the defendant. She was travelling home from the airbase. Now, Hayes had requested a US military trial because she claimed that because she was working at the RAF Lakenheath base, which is in Suffolk, and en route to her home in Downham Market in Norfolk, she was actually on duty at the time of the collision. But the court was overruled that. The Deputy Senior District Judge Tan Ikram at Westminster Magistrates Court held that she was simply travelling home from after a day at work. So Hayes only spoke to confirm her personal details and enter a plea of not guilty, and that trial is now set for the 11th of December 2023, when she's due to appear back at Norwich Crown Court. So with the Anne Sakoulis affair fresh in mind, it's depressing to hear a second incident involving somebody from an American airbase and a motorcyclist. Right, Kevin's looked in. Good morning. Steve's here too. Thanks for you coming in today. Day late. As I said, I was travelling home from Devon yesterday, so not really in a position to deliver a live show. Second story of the morning, and a slightly odd one actually. Several Melbourne councils are under fire for allegedly cutting down trees beside footpaths. Now, this is all due to Australia Post's new environmentally friendly fleet of electric tricycles. Now, these are being rolled out in the Victoria area. 500 of them are going out onto the footpaths and pavements in the area to replace the petrol-engined motorcycles that posties have traditionally used there. The idea is to reduce emissions and to improve the safety of the people who ride them. Now, they also carry more letters and parcels. Apparently they can lug around up to 100 small parcels and 1,200 letters, so 3 times the amount that you can get on a traditional motorcycle. And they will help Australia Post rather, to meet the increased demand for home delivery that began during the pandemic. Now, that all sounds totally reasonable, of course, but unfortunately the wider vehicles also require more room, and under legislation, Australia Post operatives can use these vehicles on footpaths. And so the council's have been cutting back undergrowth and overhanging branches to make room for them. But residents have complained that the steps have been going too far, because they say mature trees are also being cut down in streets to let these vehicles access properties via the pavements. Australia Post said they did actually request the removal of undergrowth, and which are alongside the footpaths, but they didn't actually ask for trees to be cut down. And they said it's important we have clear access to property so we can keep delivering our customers' letters and parcels efficiently and ensure a safe working environment for our team members. What the truth of this is, I don't really know, but whatever the case is, electric vehicles may be a sustainable way to deliver parcels, but if you start damaging the environment to get them to the places they need to go, there's something wrong there, I think. Okay, and on to the stories from the earlier part of this year. These are some of the important stories, and also some of the simply weird stuff that caught my eye over the year. So I do hope you enjoy this sort of retrospective look at the first 6 months of the outgoing year. So, starting with January. Now, police stopped a Wiltshire woman with no driving licence, and it turned out that she'd been driving since 1983. They pulled a 55-year-old woman motorist over in a routine check and discovered that she had never held a full licence. Police were told that she'd been taught to drive when she was a schoolgirl, 17 years old, but had never actually taken a test. Having called for a recovery lorry to impound her vehicle, she was told to walk home, not really surprisingly there. In a more serious story, though, MCE Insurance also collapsed in January this year, and that forced the firm to cancel bike policies. Now, 100,000 plus riders were actually insured with the insolvent Gibraltar-based company. At first, it was said that they were just simply taking on no new work, and existing policies would be covered, and then it was announced that those policies too would be cancelled, and it would be down to the holders of those policies to apply to the insurance ombudsman for a refund. So a real mess of a situation, and very unfortunate for anybody there who held insurance. Of course, many riders were then forced to pay up front for a second policy long before they ever had any chance of getting money back from the insurance ombudsman. Insurance based in offshore companies like Gibraltar, not a very good idea, in my opinion, because you operate under different rules, of course. The complication in the whole thing was that the broker, which was also called MCE, was unaffected because that was a UK-based company. So many people got very confused as to whether or not they were insured or not. So it was a real mess. Another mess was in Bath, where a big row erupted in the council. I read quite a lot about this. It was quite amusing, really. The former Conservative administration had erected new traffic light controls, and when air quality studies were done, they were found to have made air quality worse. Now, it was claimed that these traffic controls would actually improve air quality in the city centre, but what it appears to have done is changed the patterns of traffic flow, which have made it worse outside the immediate area which the lights controlled. So lots and lots of finger pointing and recriminations in that particular case. Now, electric vehicles obviously been big in the news over the last couple of years, and FEMA flagged up in January that there was a lack of planning for e-bike charging right across the EU. Now, that happened to be at roughly the same time that the UK government was actually requiring all new homes to have EV charge points. But the government in here also quietly U-turned on a commitment which would have meant that larger businesses would have had to install charging points in their car parks. They put that one on ice, so businesses now don't have to install charging points. Effectively, you have to do all your charging at home and then drive to work and hope you've got enough power to get you home again. The Treasury simultaneously estimated that the shift to EVs could be costing the Treasury $5 billion in lost fuel duty within a few years. And as it happens, I suggested in that piece that it wouldn't be long before the government would look to introduce some taxation on EVs, something, of course, which happened towards the end of the year. Talking of electric vehicles, Livewire was spun off, as you probably know, from Harley Davidson. They linked with Kymco, the Taiwanese manufacturer, aren't they, Kymco? But they then revealed plans to expand the Kymco range. Start again to expand the Livewire range with 3 new electric bikes to complement the original Livewire, and these would come with the catchy names of S2, S3 and S4. Little more detail was available at that time, other than they would use a platform approach to construction. So in other words, same sort of running chassis and plug in different batteries, different motors to give you the different sort of power outputs of the bikes, and probably different handlebars and foot peg positions and things to offer a range of different motorcycles. An Italian brand, Marzocchi, who are well known for their suspension units, actually moved all their production to China. The TT went CE for track leathers, and back protectors became mandatory for track days. Here in the UK, another crash-prone road, Horseshoes Pass in Wales, got a blanket 40-mile-per-hour speed limit and predictable howls of protest, of course, from riders and drivers who enjoy riding that particular road. MAG targeted potholes as a priority, and the DFT paused the rollout of so-called smart motorways for 5 years to collect data. And of course, many of us wondered at that point why they hadn't actually got better data before they went ahead with the rollout of the motorways as they are at the moment. Incidentally, I did come across a broken down vehicle being collected on the what would have been the hard shoulder, but is now actually a live running lane of the M3 on the way back from Devon yesterday. Fortunately, it wasn't in the pelting rain, and there was a warning operating early enough to see what was happening. Meanwhile, the Highway Code produced some new rules on dealing with cyclists and pedestrians. The DVSA did actually hand out some advice to instructors, but I have to admit, when I looked at it, I actually ended up with more questions than answers reading that advice about what we were supposed to be teaching new riders and drivers about how to deal with those highway code changes. And Edmund King of the AA, he suggested that new drivers wouldn't need to learn about gears. Well, I'm not sure about that. And so on to February. And the long-running Norton saga seemed to come to an end as the former owner of the company, Stuart Garner, pleaded guilty to his pension fund raid. The DVSA announced a plan to reduce waiting lists by introducing a 4-week wait after a test fail. The idea is that drivers, in particular, who have a first-time pass rate of slightly less than 50%, if they were given more tuition, they would have a higher pass rate, and so they wouldn't need to keep coming back and taking retests. That's the plan. By penalising drivers who take a test and then fail it, the theory is that you would increase the number of available tests for learners to pass first time. Unfortunately, they then came under fire for cancelling tests themselves, and one such cancellation was due to finding pencil rubber and hair on the carpet of the car, which, according to a spokesman, was perfectly legitimate because the DVSA have a priority, quote, to protect our customers and staff and stop the spread of COVID-19. Guidance has been issued that cars used on driving tests must be cleaned before the test to lessen the chance of infection. Driving tests will not go ahead if this has not been followed to ensure public safety. Well, okay, yes, but neither the instructor himself nor the father of the 17-year-old who was due to take the test was particularly impressed with this, because they described the car as spotless, quote, apart from a few tiny bits of rubber from where the instructor had rubbed something out of his diary. That was the father of the young driver talking. The learner herself had been waiting months for his test as the DVSA struggled with the COVID backlog. Mind you, none of that would actually have bothered the driver of over 70 years behind the wheel, who had never acquired a license. Now, I noticed in January that a woman had been caught driving, having taken some lessons at 17 and been caught some years later. But this guy was in his 80s when he was pulled up in a supermarket car park, and he actually confessed that he had been driving since he was 12. Now, not surprisingly, the officers also discovered that he'd never had insurance either, but he'd never had a crash. And I have to say, that's a lot more than a lot of licensed and insured drivers and riders manage. Here in London, Harrow Council launched a crackdown on illegally parked fast food bikes. And in northwest London, in Stoke Newington, 8 riders were arrested for driving licence insurance offences, and 22 scooters and motorbikes were actually seized as part of a Met Police and Home Office crackdown targeting delivery riders. In France, news broke, though, that learner riders would be taught to filter, and German riders were announced that they'd be fighting back against roads closed to motorcycles. And Danish police, they announced that they would be seizing motorcycles if they were ridden in what they called an insane manner. Meanwhile, Met Police came under fire for announcing a target for speeding convictions. We often hear a great deal about how the police do not have targets for speeding, but then the Met Police spoiled the story by saying that they actually wanted to catch 1 million people a year in London for speeding. Also back here in the UK, MAG quit the barely year-old National Motorcycle Council. Now, you may recall that was founded back in 2021, and it was a body which was due to represent motorcyclists without actually having any motorcyclists, only organisations representing motorcyclists to speak on it. MAG pulled out. The organisers of the London Bike Show, they reminded traders of the CE rules for clothing shortly before trading standards officers actually arrived at the show to investigate what was going on in terms of the sale of non-approved clothing. And if you go back and look at the relevant show, you'll find that they did discover quite a few stands were selling either mislabeled or no labels at all, non-approved clothing. And those the team turned out again at the Bristol Classic show later that month. And so to March. And of course, the big news story for March was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And the immediate knock-on effect was that UK fuel prices soared. And of course, the other effect was sanctions against Russia too. So a lot of manufacturers and suppliers promptly suspended either operations within the country or stopped delivering parts and supplies to Russia. Here in the UK, things went the other way because we actually lifted tariffs on US bike brands. Now, those had been imposed, you may recall, after moves by the former Trump administration, which targeted specific EU exports to the US. There were reciprocal measures taken by the EU, and of course the UK was part of the EU at that time. So those tariffs were lifted, and Harley Davidsons should have got a little bit more cheap. Ground movements closed one of Britain's favourite biking roads, Snake Pass, for months. I don't know how that's going ahead. Last time I was up there, which was in the autumn, it was open to light vehicles again. But 3 off-duty police officers, they pleaded guilty to dangerous riding after 2 of them were seriously hurt in a collision with a car near Chichester in Sussex. 2 of the officers also admitted speeding. The EU Commission, however, ruled in favour of speed limiters on bikes by 2030. The Scottish Motorcycle Show was next on the visit list for trading standards as they headed off to look to see who was still trying to sell non-approved clothing, and they did find a few items, I believe, but it appears that the message was getting out because there were certainly fewer caught than there were at the two earlier shows in the year. Another big story, probably connected with the knock-on effect of the COVID situation, and also the interruption to supplies from Russia and everything. The Triumph actually U-turned, having closed down all their production lines bar two and announcing that they would shut down two. They actually changed their mind, and they actually fired up production lines again in the UK and started manufacturing motorcycles here in the UK for supply to the UK and also to Europe, presumably because of these issues of getting bikes where they were needed. Yamaha announced, interestingly enough, that they were reconsidering hybrid bikes, something they previously said they weren't interested in. They also, for some reason, showed off a machine with power steering. I really do have to wonder what on earth the point of that is. Sadly, in Ireland, though, or Northern Ireland, the historic Ulster GP was called off. Funding collapsed, and a big row broke out between the Northern Ireland tourist body, which actually puts money into these events, and the organisers. The organisers said that they didn't get the money they were promised. The Northern Ireland tourist body said that the Ulster GP and also the Northwest 200 get a really significant part of their available budget, and they simply didn't have more to put in. And it was no good the organisers simply asking for more money if there wasn't enough to go around. So hopefully something will be sorted out for next year. Maybe the organisers will start looking for some funding outside of the local government. And so to April. And Stuart Garner's case, he was sentenced and he actually walked free from court. And finally, MCE insurance customers began to receive partial paybacks on their insurance costs. In Italy, a forest fire was actually started by a motorcycle crash. Dutch police shut down illegal street races and they seized the bikes involved. And here in the UK, rather more alarmingly, UK local councils were given the power to fine riders and drivers for minor traffic offences. Now, this has been used on a trial basis in a few places. In London, for example, you can be fined by the local council for stopping in a box junction, and Hammersmith and Fulham have made full use of these powers, and there are several box junctions which have raked in huge amounts of money. Well, wherever you travel now, you are liable to find that these kind of no right turn junctions, for example, and box junctions are likely to be monitored by CCTV, and the council will issue a fine if you transgress. No points, but a hit to your wallet. And so on to May. Now, the government announced plans to legalise the use of private e-step scooters in the Queen's speech at the opening of the new session of Parliament. Not surprisingly, the UK's Motorcycle Industry Association, that is the trade body that represents importers and dealers here in the UK, they welcome that announcement, presumably sensing an opportunity for involvement and more money for their members. Now, FEMA, the European Motorcycle Riders' Rights Organisation, they pushed for onboard vehicle data, which is likely to be collected very soon by most vehicles, to come with specific privacy rules about who can actually get to that data. The EU announced that anti-tampering rules, which would apply to motorcycles, would not be retrospective, and a UK bill overturned an EU ruling that was requiring compulsory third-party insurance for off-road bike sport. I'm not quite sure what's happened in Europe on that one. I don't know if it's been overturned there too. Meanwhile, Netherlands bikers were very pleased to hear that they would get a statutory 1-year warranty on used bikes, but supply chain issues brought Harley-Davidson's production of new machines to a complete standstill. Meanwhile, the Austrians took a dim view of wheelies and stoppies, and they announced that they would be henceforth banned on roads in the country. Suzuki shocked the world by announcing that they were planning to exit MotoGP, and that sparked a bunch of stories suggesting that Suzuki were in fact about to end their involvement with motorcycles altogether. And a number of different spokespersons for the organization had to step up and say, no, this was all about saving money by coming out of racing, and nothing to do with their plans for motorcycles. Meanwhile, Ducati took advantage of growing sales in South America by building an assembly plant in Argentina, which began production in May. And Honda, stories began to circulate that they were about to relaunch the much loved Hornet. Now, back in the UK again, a police and crime commissioner who had promised to crack down on speeding was caught speeding 5 times in 12 weeks. And in one of those, it could only happen in America stories, Florida police managed to injure 4 people, including, I believe, at least 1 policeman, by tasering a suspect. Guess where? In a petrol station, in a fire hazard zone. The result was a fireball which caught several people. And so finally today to June, the story that really cracked me up, I have to say, was that a US Air Force crew were disciplined for picking up a motorcycle. Why? Well, because they actually flew a C-130 Hercules and made an unauthorized stop at an airbase to pick up this bike and then fly it to their home base. Not surprisingly, the US Air Force didn't take entirely kindly to the misappropriation of their aeroplane. The MotoGP was affected by the continuing problems between Ukraine and Russia as the war raged on. The Finnish round of MotoGP was cancelled due to its proximity to the Russian border. There was a safety recall announced on a batch of Alpine-style gloves. Now, this was due to chromium contamination. Chromium is a metal. It's quite a nasty metal. It's used in the processing of the leather, the tanning process, but it should all be washed out and neutralized. But it appears a batch of these gloves got through and didn't meet the safety standards. Here in London, fuel topped £2 a gallon. Try a litre, that's more likely. That would be something approaching £9 a gallon. And 7,000 Okada taxi bikes were crushed in 3 months in Lagos as the authorities there clamped down on their ban of the use of these for-hire motorcycles. In Germany, however, despite protests from riders, electric bikes were still being banned from supposedly quiet roads in Germany. The ruling over there had been brought in to reduce noise from motorcycles, and not surprisingly, the organisations for riders' rights were questioning why the ban included electric bikes. At the TT, Peter Hickman shattered the TT Superbike race record on a road legal tyre. But the TT organisers also named the wrong French sidecar competitor after a fatal crash. The misidentification turned out to be due to the riders having worn their partners' dog tags. And finally, the first ever e-bike only training school opened near Paris in France. So there we go. That's our retrospective for the first 6 months of the year. First show will be on I'm just trying to remember when it'll be. It'll be Sunday, won't it? It'll be Sunday, and it'll be the 4th of let's try and get the right month on the calendar. It'll be the 1st. Yes, it'll be New Year's Day. That's right. Of course it will. I should be able to remember that because there was a Christmas Day show as well. So next show, I will look back at the second half of the year. I'll probably have a couple of news stories as well to keep you interested. So as we bring 2022 to a halt, it's been another sort of fairly weird year for us all. all I can do is wish you a very happy new year, and I will see you live on New Year's Day at 11. So thank you very much again for looking in today. Thank you to all of you who have looked in over the course of the year, and beyond that, thank you to everybody who has looked in. This is actually the 300th show, which if you'd asked me if I would have done 300 of these shows when I started, I would have been very surprised. But as long as people keep coming back to watch them, I will keep producing them for you. So Paul's looked in and said, congratulations on the 300th. And Graham says, wishing you a happy and safe new year. Yep, I can echo that to all of you out there, either watching the show live or who will catch up with it later. So don't forget, if you are out there today on your bike, do stay shiny side up. This is Kevin Williams of Survival Skills, thanking you for watching Elevenses once again.